La Spezia Harbor, Italy, September 1943. One of Nazi Germany's most strategically important naval bases in the Mediterranean, home to destroyers, cruisers, and the supply ships that kept Axis forces in the region operational. The harbor was a fortress. Searchlights swept the water continuously. Patrol boats circled endlessly. Anti-torpedo nets blocked every approach, and Italian guards watched from shore positions with orders to shoot anything suspicious. Beneath the dark surface, 3 British frogmen swam silently toward their targets. They'd been underwater for nearly 2 hours, navigating by compass, breathing from devices strapped to their chests that looked nothing like the bulky diving apparatus German guards had been trained to watch for. No surface hoses, no bubbles rising to betray their position, no noise except the muffled sound of their own heartbeats. Lieutenant Robert Evans approached the hull of an Italian destroyer, the Bolzano. Strapped to his chest was a revolutionary British invention, the DSEA, Davis Submerged Escape Apparatus, modified for offensive operations. The device recycled his exhaled breath, scrubbing out carbon dioxide and adding pure oxygen, creating a closed-circuit system that released no telltale bubbles to the surface. Evans and his team were invisible. Guards scanned the water's surface, seeing nothing. Patrol boats passed directly overhead, their crews oblivious to the saboteurs 5 meters below. Hydrophones detected no sound. The frogmen's breathing apparatus was completely silent. For 2 hours, the British swimmers had operated in the heart of enemy territory without detection, accomplishing what conventional diving equipment would have made impossible. They attached limpet mines to 3 ships, set the timers, and withdrew through the same black water that had concealed their approach. Hours later, back aboard their submarine extraction vessel, they heard the distant thunder of explosions echoing across the harbor. 3 Italian naval vessels, the Bolzano, the Gorizia, and a transport ship, were severely damaged, removed from operations for months of repair. The Italians never understood how the attack happened. No surface approach had been observed. No divers with traditional equipment had been spotted. It seemed impossible that saboteurs could have penetrated such heavily defended waters.
They didn't know about the British gills, the closed-circuit breathing apparatus that had made underwater ghosts of ordinary men. This is the story of the rebreather and how British ingenuity turned human lungs into underwater weapons. Let's go back to 1940. The Royal Navy and Special Operations Executive were planning underwater sabotage operations against Axis shipping, but they faced a fundamental problem. Conventional diving equipment made stealth impossible. Standard diving suits required surface air supply through hoses, completely impractical for covert operations. Self-contained apparatus using compressed air created streams of bubbles with every exhale, instantly visible to observers, audible to hydrophones, a perfect betrayal of a diver's presence and position. For harbor attacks, submarine infiltrations, or any underwater operation where detection meant death, British saboteurs needed a way to breathe underwater that produced no bubbles, made no noise, and allowed extended submerged duration. The solution required rethinking how humans breathed underwater, moving from open-circuit systems that exhausted breath into the water to closed-circuit systems that recycled each breath. The technology already existed, though not for combat applications. The Davis Submerged Escape Apparatus had been developed in the 1920s for submarine crews to escape from sunken vessels. The DSEA was a closed-circuit oxygen rebreather. It supplied pure oxygen to the diver, absorbed the carbon dioxide from exhaled breath using chemical scrubbers, and recirculated the cleaned oxygen back to the diver. No air was expelled into the water, no bubbles, complete silence. Military planners recognized the DSEA's potential for covert operations. If submarine crews could use it to escape from depths, why couldn't combat swimmers use it to approach enemy ships? The apparatus needed modifications for offensive rather than escape purposes, but the fundamental technology was proven and available. The Admiralty's experimental diving unit, working with the Special Operations Executive and what would become the Special Boat Service, adapted the DSCA for combat swimmer operations. They refined the harness for better mobility, modified the oxygen supply for extended duration, improved the carbon dioxide scrubbing system for efficiency, and trained selected personnel in its use under combat conditions. The closed-circuit rebreather represented a completely different approach to underwater breathing compared to conventional diving equipment. Understanding how it worked requires examining the chemistry and mechanics that made bubble-free breathing possible. The core principle was simple. Humans don't use all the oxygen they inhale. Each breath contains roughly 21% oxygen, but we metabolize only about 5% of that. The exhaled breath still contains approximately 16% oxygen, plenty to support life if it could be cleaned and reused. The challenge was removing the carbon dioxide our bodies produced, which would poison us if allowed to accumulate. The DSCA addressed this through a closed-loop system. The diver wore a rubberized breathing bag, a counterlung, strapped to the chest. This flexible bladder expanded and contracted with each breath, serving as an oxygen reservoir. When the diver inhaled, oxygen-rich gas flowed from the counterlung through a breathing hose into the mouthpiece. When exhaling, breath flowed back through a different hose into a canister filled with soda lime, a chemical compound that absorbed carbon dioxide through a chemical reaction. The chemical reaction was elegant. Soda lime, a mixture of calcium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide, reacted with carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate and water, effectively scrubbing the CO2 from the exhaled breath. The cleaned breath then returned to the counterlung, where it mixed with fresh oxygen supplied from a small high-pressure cylinder. This recycled, renewed breath was ready for the next inhalation. The oxygen supply was critical. A small steel cylinder, roughly the size of a large thermos bottle, contained pure oxygen compressed to approximately 120 atmospheres, 1800 psi. A pressure regulator reduced this to breathing pressure, adding oxygen to the system at a rate matching the diver's consumption. The addition was automatic. A demand valve added oxygen whenever the counterlung pressure dropped below optimal levels. The breathing loop was completely closed except for deliberate purge valves that allowed divers to vent gas if the system overpressurized. Under normal operation, no gas escaped. Every breath was recycled, scrubbed, and reused. The only gas entering the water was occasional tiny releases from pressure adjustment, and these were small enough to dissolve without creating visible bubbles. The harness was designed for combat swimmer use rather than escape. The counterlung positioned on the chest for easy breathing and swimming mobility. The oxygen cylinder mounted on the back, weight balanced to maintain neutral buoyancy. The whole assembly weighed approximately 15 kilograms in air but was nearly neutral in water, allowing divers to swim efficiently without fighting buoyancy issues. Duration was impressive compared to open-circuit equipment. A diver at moderate exertion levels could remain submerged for 3 to 4 hours on a single oxygen cylinder filling. This extended duration allowed long approaches to targets, time to place explosives carefully, and unhurried withdrawals, all without surfacing or creating detectable signature. The mouthpiece was a critical component. Divers couldn't breathe through their noses. The mouthpiece provided the only breathing path, connecting to separate inhalation and exhalation hoses through one-way valves that prevented backflow. Training emphasized keeping the mouthpiece secure and maintaining breathing discipline. Panic could cause divers to spit out the mouthpiece or breathe through their nose, with fatal consequences. Temperature management was significant. The chemical reaction in the soda lime canister generated heat, sometimes enough to make the canister uncomfortably warm against the diver's chest. In cold water operations, this warmth was actually beneficial, providing some insulation against hypothermia. In warmer waters, it could be uncomfortable, though rarely problematic. Operating a closed-circuit rebreather required extensive training that went far beyond normal swimming or diving skills. The apparatus had unique characteristics, risks, and operating procedures that could kill untrained users through oxygen toxicity, carbon dioxide poisoning, or equipment malfunction.
Basic training began with theory. Students learned respiratory physiology, gas laws, oxygen toxicity dangers, carbon dioxide poisoning symptoms, and emergency procedures. They memorized the assembly sequence for the rebreather, practiced donning and removing it, and learned to identify problems through breathing feel and apparatus behavior. Pool training introduced breathing from the apparatus in controlled conditions. Trainees learned the unique sensation of rebreather breathing, noticeably different from natural breathing or open-circuit scuba. The breath resistance was higher due to passing through chemical scrubbers and breathing hoses. The counterlung movement was visible and tactile, watching and feeling it expand and contract with each breath. Buoyancy control required relearning skills that experienced divers thought they'd mastered. Closed-circuit rebreathers maintained nearly constant buoyancy regardless of depth because they didn't compress like open-circuit tanks. Divers had to adjust their understanding of buoyancy physics and develop new muscle memory for depth control. Oxygen toxicity awareness was critical. Pure oxygen becomes toxic at depths below about 10 meters. The partial pressure at greater depths causes central nervous system oxygen poisoning that manifests as convulsions, unconsciousness, and death. Rebreather training emphasized strict depth discipline. Combat swimmers were trained to remain above 7 meters depth with emergency ascent procedures if accidentally going deeper. Emergency drills practice flooding scenarios, torn breathing bags, mouthpiece loss, and regulator failures. Trainees rehearsed emergency ascent procedures, buddy breathing, sharing one rebreather between two divers, and equipment repair underwater. The training was deliberately stressful. Instructors created simulated emergencies without warning, forcing students to respond correctly under pressure. Navigation training combined compass work with dead reckoning. Operating at night in enemy harbors meant divers couldn't surface to check position without risk of detection. They learned to navigate by counting swim strokes, maintaining compass bearings, using bottom contours and structures for reference, and coordinating with swim partners through underwater hand signals and touch communication. The operational doctrine emphasized patience and silence. Unlike combat operations on land where speed and aggression often won, underwater operations rewarded slow, deliberate movement. Rushed swimming created noise and exhausted divers. Thrashing around raised silt that might be visible from surface. The doctrine taught slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Careful, controlled movement that covered distance efficiently while maintaining stealth. Closed-circuit rebreathers saw extensive combat use throughout World War II, primarily by British and Italian Special Forces units with smaller scale use by other nations. The operations ranged from the highly successful to the catastrophically failed, but the rebreather technology itself consistently performed as designed. Operation Principle in September 1943, the La Spezia harbor attack described in our opening, demonstrated the rebreather's capabilities. 3 British frogmen penetrated heavily defended waters, placed limpet mines on 3 ships, and withdrew undetected. The attack succeeded entirely due to the bubble-free approach that conventional diving equipment would have made impossible. Italian combat swimmers, the famed Decima Mas unit, used similar closed-circuit rebreathers with remarkable success against British shipping in Mediterranean harbors. Their December 1941 attack on Alexandria Harbor damaged 2 British battleships, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Valiant, using rebreathers to approach undetected and attach limpet mines. The British studied captured Italian equipment and refined their own designs based on lessons learned. The British chariots, human-guided torpedoes operated by 2-man crews breathing from rebreathers, attacked German shipping in Norwegian fjords and Italian harbors. The chariot operators wore rebreathers to avoid surface exposure during the slow, dangerous approach rides. Several operations succeeded in damaging or sinking significant enemy vessels. Operation Remorse in February 1942 saw British frogmen attack Japanese shipping in Singapore Harbor using rebreathers. The operation was compromised before achieving significant results, but the approach through heavily defended waters without detection demonstrated the equipment's stealth capabilities.
Reconnaissance operations used rebreathers for beach surveys before amphibious invasions. Combat swimmers would approach enemy-held beaches at night, measure depths, identify obstacles, and map defensive positions, all while breathing from rebreathers that kept them invisible to shore defenders. These reconnaissance missions provided intelligence that saved countless lives during actual invasions. Submarine rescue operations occasionally employed rebreathers when crews needed to escape from depths too great for free ascent. While this was the original design purpose, combat conditions sometimes required submarine crews to use the apparatus defensively, escaping from damaged submarines under fire or in hostile waters. The psychological impact on enemy forces was significant. Axis harbor defenders became paranoid about underwater attack, implementing countermeasures that consumed resources and degraded efficiency.
The knowledge that enemy combat swimmers might be present at any time, completely invisible and silent, created stress and constant vigilance that fatigued defenders. Limitations, dangers, and operational failures. Despite revolutionary capabilities, closed-circuit rebreathers has serious limitations and inherent dangers that cause casualties and mission failures. Understanding these constraints is essential for balanced assessment of the technology. Oxygen toxicity was the most serious physiological danger. Breathing pure oxygen at depths greater than 10 meters causes seizures and loss of consciousness, often fatal underwater. Several combat swimmers died from oxygen toxicity during training or operations when they accidentally descended too deep or failed to monitor depth properly. The symptom onset was rapid and unpredictable, giving little warning before catastrophic failure. Carbon dioxide poisoning occurred when soda lime scrubbers became exhausted or saturated. The scrubbers had finite capacity, typically lasting 3 to 4 hours depending on exertion level and breathing rate. Exceeding this duration or breathing too rapidly could overwhelm the scrubbing capacity, allowing CO2 to accumulate. Early symptoms included headache and confusion, but these subtle warnings were easily missed during demanding operations. Advanced poisoning caused disorientation, unconsciousness, and death. Cold water dramatically reduced the apparatus's safe operating duration. Cold temperatures decreased the soda lime scrubbing efficiency and increased the diver's oxygen consumption through shivering. Operations in water below 10 degrees C, 50 F, saw safe dive times reduced to 90 minutes or less, barely adequate for many missions. Equipment reliability was problematic despite rigorous quality control. Breathing bags developed leaks, seals failed, valves stuck, and oxygen bottles' contents were occasionally contaminated. Any equipment failure underwater created immediate life-threatening emergency. Combat swimmers carried backup emergency breathing apparatus, but these provided only minutes of breathing time, enough to reach surface or swim to safety if close, but inadequate for deep penetration missions. Physical exhaustion was amplified by the breathing resistance and weight of equipment. Swimming for hours while carrying rebreather apparatus, weapons, explosives, and navigation equipment pushed physical conditioning to extremes. Many missions failed not from equipment problems, but from human exhaustion. Swimmers simply unable to complete the approach, place charges, and withdraw before becoming too tired to continue. The mouthpiece could be accidentally dislodged by obstacles, equipment snags, or sudden movements. Losing the mouthpiece meant losing your breathing source. Divers had to find and reinsert it within seconds or face drowning. Training emphasized securing the mouthpiece, but accidents happened, and several combat swimmers died from mouthpiece loss. Navigation in zero visibility conditions tested even experienced divers. Many harbors had murky water, where visibility was measured in inches. Swimming on compass bearing while maintaining depth, avoiding obstacles, and finding specific ships in these conditions required extraordinary skill. Some operations failed because divers simply couldn't locate their targets in the darkness. Enemy countermeasures evolved as Axis forces recognized the underwater threat. Hydrophones detected even quiet divers at close range. Patrol boats used depth charges at random intervals to discourage swimmers.
Some harbors deployed underwater detection systems, primitive sonar that could identify swimmer-sized targets. Nets and obstacles forced divers to navigate complex mazes that increased approach time and exhaustion. The closed-circuit rebreather technology developed during World War II became the foundation for modern military and civilian diving rebreathers. Post-war development refined the concept through advanced materials, electronics, and understanding of diving physiology. Military forces worldwide adopted combat swimmer programs based on British World War II experience. Navy SEALs, British Special Boat Service, Soviet combat divers, and special forces from dozens of nations trained with closed-circuit rebreathers descended directly from wartime designs. The fundamental principle, bubble-free breathing for stealth operations, remained as valid in the Cold War and beyond as it had been in 1940. Modern military rebreathers incorporate electronic monitoring systems that track oxygen levels, carbon dioxide scrubber capacity, and depth continuously. Computers calculate safe operating parameters in real time, warning divers of approaching limits and automatically adjusting gas mixtures. These sophistications dramatically improve safety and extend capabilities, though the basic chemistry remains unchanged. Mixed gas rebreathers replaced pure oxygen systems for deeper operations. By using helium-oxygen or nitrogen-oxygen mixtures, modern rebreathers safely operate at depths that would be immediately fatal with pure oxygen. This capability expanded military diving operations to include deeper targets, underwater demolition of harbor facilities, and submarine infiltration missions beyond World War II possibilities. Civilian technical diving embraced rebreather technology for deep wreck exploration, cave diving, and extended underwater photography. Modern civilian rebreathers descended from military technology make previously impossible dives routine, though they retain the inherent risks that made military training so demanding. The physiological understanding developed during wartime rebreather use advanced diving medicine significantly. Research on oxygen toxicity, carbon dioxide tolerance, and closed-circuit breathing contributed to broader knowledge that improved all forms of diving safety, from recreational scuba to commercial deep-sea operations. Museums display World War II rebreathers as artifacts of special operations history. The Royal Navy Museum, Imperial War Museum, and Special Boat Service Heritage Center maintain collections that preserve the apparatus and tell stories of the men who used them. Some displays include operational examples that visitors can examine closely, appreciating the simple yet sophisticated engineering. Veterans who survived rebreather operations rarely discussed their experiences publicly during the Cold War, as similar techniques remained operational and classified. As details declassified in recent decades, surviving veterans shared memories of the terror and exhilaration of breathing underwater in enemy territory, knowing detection meant certain death but trusting their gills to keep them invisible. The closed-circuit rebreather didn't look like a revolutionary weapon. It was just rubber bags, chemical canisters, pressure regulators, and breathing hoses. Industrial equipment adapted for military purpose. But it gave combat swimmers something previously impossible: the ability to operate underwater for hours without creating the bubbles that would betray their presence. That capability transformed underwater warfare. Before rebreathers, divers were constrained by surface connections or betrayed by their own breathing. After rebreathers, combat swimmers became underwater ghosts, invisible, silent, able to penetrate defended harbors that conventional forces couldn't approach without massive casualties. The men who used these gills operated in conditions of extraordinary stress, swimming through black water toward targets surrounded by enemies who would execute them if caught, breathing from apparatus that could kill them through equipment failure or operator error, navigating by compass and dead reckoning toward ships they couldn't see until close enough to touch. This required courage beyond normal human experience. The technology was unforgiving of mistakes. Descend too deep and oxygen toxicity caused seizures and death. Exhaust the carbon dioxide scrubbers and you suffocated while believing you were breathing normally. Lose the mouthpiece and you drowned within seconds. Yet men trained in these systems trusted them with their lives and used them to accomplish missions that conventional approaches couldn't achieve. The Germans and Italians knew British combat swimmers attacked their harbors. They implemented countermeasures, increased security, deployed detection equipment. But they never effectively countered the rebreather advantage because they couldn't see divers who produced no bubbles, couldn't hear breathing apparatus that made no noise, couldn't detect approaches that left no trace. So why did these hidden British underwater gills let saboteurs swim undetected? Because British engineers solved the bubble problem by eliminating bubbles entirely. Because they created closed-circuit systems that recycled each breath instead of exhausting it into the water. Because they trained men to operate this equipment under conditions that tested human limits. The rebreather turned lungs into weapons by making breathing invisible. Every breath was cleaned, renewed, and recycled without creating the telltale stream of bubbles that conventional diving produced. Combat swimmers breathed like fish, extracting what they needed from each breath and returning nothing to betray their presence. That's not just clever engineering, that's transformation of human physiology into tactical advantage. The rebreather didn't make men into fish, but it made them invisible underwater, which was almost the same thing for military purposes. The legacy lives on in every modern combat diver, every special forces underwater operation, every covert approach to enemy shipping.
The technology evolved, the materials improved, the capabilities expanded, but the fundamental principle established in British laboratories and proven in Italian harbors during World War II remains unchanged. Sometimes the most revolutionary weapons don't destroy, they conceal. And sometimes the most powerful capability isn't the ability to attack, but the ability to approach unseen, unheard, undetected until the moment you strike. The British combat swimmers in World War II harbors didn't have gills, but with their closed-circuit rebreathers, they breathed underwater for hours without trace. And to the terrified defenders watching for threats they never saw, these invisible saboteurs might as well have been creatures from the deep. Silent, patient, deadly, breathing like the sea itself. From underwater rebreathers to limpet mines to playing cards hiding maps, World War II weapons reveals how British innovation turned human limitations into tactical advantages. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of technology that gave ordinary soldiers extraordinary capabilities. From underwater rebreathers to limpet mines to playing cards hiding maps, World War II weapons reveals how British innovation turned human limitations into tactical advantages. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of technology that gave ordinary soldiers extraordinary capabilities.